tonight on Tea and Tarot, it's going to be Tea, Tarot, and Kabbalah. I am really excited to finally get the opportunity to work with and speak with my fellow Jewish, Samantha Goldberg Blackthorn. And I think we're going to have a really beautiful discussion. We did have an outline of all the things we wanted to talk about, but then we spoke on the phone, and I think it's going to be a little bit more organic and fluid than the outline. So I'm really hoping that everybody brings questions forth and interacts with the material that we're about to share here. So Samantha, I do not see your lovely face, but I would, if you were
How do
nearby.
I don't know how to do it. I can see people there. Can you see me now?
I can see you. Now it's just a matter of yeah, just be comfortable and let's have the conversation. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about what you do and your background, perhaps?
Sure. I see Wendy on here. Hi, Wendy. And that's all I can see is some words over my face. Is that normal, Cassandra?
Yes, that is. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So I'm Samantha Goldberg Blackthorn, as Cassandra already mentioned, and I'm so happy to be here with you. And both of us just really connect over being Jewish and being witches and being mystics and being Jewish mystics. And for me, I've studied Judaism. Studied Judaism? I don't even know if studied Judaism is the right word, because I didn't even know there were not Jewish people until I was like 8. I thought everyone was Jewish. And yeah, that's a thing. And it's really cool being raised Jewish, because there's no question of like whether mysticism is of the devil or anything like that. So even the most mainstream people are open to this whole concept of the mystic and of mysticism. So that's really fun. And I do study the Zohar, which is the commentary on the Torah, which is where the term Kabbalah comes from. And I love to teach tarot. I love to give people vocabulary to open their minds and to have deeper ability to study on your own. So I don't think Cassandra or I are here to profess that we know like everything about the Jewish mystic world or tarot, but just to give some vocabulary and to show some connection between the tarot as we know it, especially based on the decks that were informed by the Golden Dawn and earlier occults that were inspired by Eliphas Levi and some earlier non-Jewish, but they changed their names to sound Jewish occultists, and give you some vocabulary. So when you're studying on your own, you can make deeper connections. And I think the tarot is so much about deep spiral connections, just like the tree of life is. And so to provide some context there. And I think for me, that's like one of the most things I'm most honored to do in our communities, is to open that community to think about how to use these different terms coming from different faiths, from different cultures, and be able to acknowledge and honor them. And when we read tarot, we read for all different kinds of people. I've really spent time studying some Catholic symbolism, because I spend a lot of time in Mexico reading tarot, and different kinds of and different symbols, and seeing what different people think of when they see certain symbols, right? So Cassandra and I, being raised Jewish, we see, you know, a chalice and we think like, ooh, Elijah's cup, Miriam's cup. And some of my Catholic friends who are no longer Catholic are like, I don't want to drink Jesus's blood. So it's cool to see where the different things come from.
Yeah, absolutely. The way that, I mean, I know that over the course of probably the last 15 years, I know that there has been a large group of folks who have been shown interest outside of the Jewish community, that have shown interest in Kabbalah. And there's been a lot of, I guess, perhaps New Agey is the wrong word, but it's the closest that I can find to explain what is basically going on there. Like a lot of people who are wanting to dive into that deep mysticism and have an understanding of the cosmology that is the Jewish mystic tradition, right? So I love that people want to know because, in the words of G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle. And when we can apply our knowledge and begin to understand things on a broader scope, then we are able to gain wisdom and understanding and be able to connect with people across many different areas. I love that you've studied Catholicism and applied that to your work as well. That's
Yeah.
pretty cool. So the one of the areas when I was looking at a lot of the writings that have been done, and I've been doing this for a very long time, looking at writings that connect tarot and Kabbalah, but in preparation for this conversation, I was trying to find something specifically of the Jewish mystic tradition that combined tarot. And of course, I'm sure perhaps you've done the same. I did not, I mostly what I found was the Hermetic, the Hermetic writings. So we could talk a little bit about what the difference is there. Are you familiar with the difference between Hermetic, Kabbalistic ideas versus Jewish? How would you characterize the differences between those two?
Yeah, for sure. So Hermeticism is way too old to really catch on to the Kabbalah, but the Kabbalists that were at least the man, so there was this like kind of story that the Zohar was like written by God and nobody knew who wrote it. And the Chabad still says that, but it turns out later that this one guy wrote it. And it's a story about a bunch of mystic rabbis traveling through the Galilee, through Israel. And the whole thing is commentary on the Torah. It starts in the beginning of the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, and goes all the way through the end and discusses how we got certain laws and certain picked and choose certain things that informs our life, right? And so Hermeticism comes from ancient Egypt. It's from Hermes, right? So we don't necessarily have a
Yeah, it was the
a
Greeks,
complement.
their appropriate, well, I say appropriation because I don't like the way that they shifted things, but it was their view when they went to be taught by the Kemites, they took in that information and put it in their own context, in their cultural context, and that's where we get Hermeticism in its
Yeah, but
original
we don't.
form. I lost the sound of you. Could you say that last part again? I'm sorry, we lost the
Yeah,
sound.
we don't have a counterpart to Hermes in Judaism. So I love the green tablets. And of course, as a scientist, I teach anatomy and study biochemistry in college. And so for that purpose, as a, scientist, like I appreciate the early Hermetics, the concepts of the elements. They found the first four elements. They started looking at astrology. They created the magus, which was where the word magic comes from, which is the first word for science, which ended up becoming alchemy, which was the second word for science. And now we're on to chemistry, And I
Mm-hmm.
sort of have this view of, like in 200 years, like all the tarot cards will have like periodic table symbols on them and they'll be like chemistry, and it'll be like the new magic word. But I think there's this concept of the all of the mystic sciences sort of having this sort of consistent question of like, how are we here? Who the hell are we? And how do we connect with God or the womb or whatever that is, right? And so this consistent thing of Hermeticism still has these gods, right? And in the Zohar, the Kabbalists of the Zohar, like the man who wrote the Zohar and the people who were expounding knowledge out of it after, were not liking this concept of this throne of God, right? And this fiery throne with this like white like hair coming out of it, they say has nothing to do with God. It had spinning wheels, you know, it had four creatures with four faces. And so this concept of like taking the concept of God down to this like tree of life, down to this like geometrical structure, I think is super unique to the Kabbalah. And I think that and I think, Cassandra, we talked about this a little bit. One of the things that I like to confront is this sort of watered down study that people do. You know, it's like, let's take the jewels of Hermeticism and the jewels of Kabbalah and the jewels of and let's not really study Torah. Like, what's the Torah? Who cares? You know, that's like religion
Yeah.
or whatever. It's like, no, the Zohar is commentary on the Torah. That's where the Kabbalah comes from. So I think of that, the way I study Taoism is kind of like that. Like, I'll read these little Taoist quotes and I'm like, oh, that's so great, you know? You know, and so I
Yeah.
think it's sort of like this need to dive in deeper. And I like sometimes to look at how people identify themselves. You know, it's even hard for me to call myself a Jewish mystic. Like, I'd be really, really cautious because I have a lot of study to do. I'm Jewish, yeah, but I can't just say I'm a Jewish mystic because I'm a mystic and I'm Jewish. That would be like, I'm Jewish, so I'm a Jewish violinist. Like, I don't play violin, so no, I'm not, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the question that we had talked about previous to this was, we have cultural appropriation. Do we have mystic appropriation? And how do we honor each like art and each tradition and still be able to work together and have these beautiful conversations at looking at like decentralizing the idea of how to unite our body and mind and soul with whatever concept of God we like to have.
Well, I think it boils down to the respect, and just exactly as you were mentioning, we can read or look into someone else's cosmology and the idea of how they approach the universe, and their understanding of it, and realize that we're all trying to access the same space. And but to really know a space is to dive deeper, and that takes. I I don't even hesitate to say decades. It really does take a long time. It's there's lives long learning that come with that. So I feel that our soul goes through many incarnations, and Kabbalistically we can actually show where that happens and how that happens. I've read quite a few lovely treatises on that. But the way that I see Kabbalah is it's and the tree of life specifically, because I think that's the space that most people can connect to without having to walk down the path of, studying Torah and the commentary and all of that, is we can connect to the physical tree of life commentary aspect to understand that the cosmology of how we get from the physical world into to reconnect with the divine, and how that we came into being through that space. So most people, when they think of Kabbalah, are thinking they have the visual of the tree of life with all the Sephirot on it, and so I definitely think that that is a great starting space to begin to have a better understanding, and to begin to then say that, that they're trying to learn more, perhaps. Would you agree? Or
Yeah,
what
no,
would you
I think that the distinction here goes back to talking about the tarot, right? Because
Yep.
Arthur Waite, who worked with Pamela Coleman Smith to create the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, which is one of the first decks that was created for the purpose of divination. But he created it for the purpose of understanding the tree of life more, not the concept of divination, right? And so it is this, like, there is a Christian mystic path of Kabbalah, and they do, I don't know how much they study the Bible with it. There's no, commentary outside of the Zohar on it as far as the Bible, but what they took from and what they gathered from, I think any tarot reader can use to deepen their understanding of the tarot, right? And so it's that concept where they took the Hebrew letters and connected them to the major arcana, where they added yuds, which, as you know, Cassandra, but for the audience, like a yud is a Hebrew letter that also represents the spark of life, or that primordial beginning. And there's yuds all over the tarot deck. There's also the tree of life itself, you know, right behind the high priestess. It's in the top of the tower. It is the exact configuration of the 10 of coins, or the 10 of pentacles. And so it has a lot of value in just studying the language of the Kabbalah, but also understanding what you're studying and where it comes from, and that it has a deeper things. Like when I study Ayurveda, like I fully understand that I am learning a very small surface, because I don't go and I don't necessarily read about all the goddesses and gods, and I don't necessarily read I've never read the whole Rig Veda, you know, or
Yeah.
but I've read the Torah like every year, my whole freaking life, you know.
Right,
Every
right.
year, for those of you who don't know, we read it week by week, and we finish the whole thing every year. And then I started reading the Zohar, and I was laughing with Cassandra, and I'm not going to show you the book in case this turns into a podcast, but the Zohar is a large textbook like
A
thing.
tome.
Yes, and there's 22 of them, all each for each letter of the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet. And so it's really beautiful in that way, that I'm only through the first one, not even through the first one. And I have a whole group of, you know, people I study with it and read it, and it changes your life when you start reading it. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, read it, find someone to read it with, like read it next to your Torah, and it is just absolutely mind-blowing what happens to your life. Your life changes. And then some of it you're like, ew, patriarchalism, ew, sexism, like, and you can really see even where some of the mystic sciences informed and created some of the mess we're in, including like the binary gender model. And so how do we take this old language and make it applicable to modern times, you know? And we can't just get rid of it and be like, it doesn't exist. But how can we reconcile that sort of separation of the divine soul into many beings in that way? And what can we find out that the Zohar has to say about life and the way that life works? And then how do we apply that to the Torah? I think that's part of my studies.
Yeah. Yeah, and to touch back on what you were saying about how that there is misogyny, there is the, you know, binary gender model. There are aspects, you know, when we are given information, when we, you know, receive information from spirit, it always comes through a filter. That's something for people to always remember, is that, you know, if I'm doing a reading for you, or you know, you're doing a reading for somebody, we have our filters. We're getting information from spirit, but it always has to travel through us. So the culture in which we were raised, our own symbolism, the way that things come to us, those things change over time and over generations. So, you know, yes, those things exist in within that space, but the great things, the enlightened, inspired words that are there are still there. They're just as valid. So,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But it's hard. I guess what I'm saying is, like, sometimes it's hard to read through some of it, right? And to really read the Zohar, like, you know, it was really hard for us to get through the whole part where, like, you just have to multiply and have sex and procreate, and it was just all about the women doing that, and you know what I mean? And we read it anyway to find those pearls, but it's so easy to be like, nope, not gonna look at that, you know? And for me, it's my culture. I feel like I have to look at it, like, where did we get this from, and what are we doing, and do I like it? Like, I love that the Zohar doesn't see a difference between angels and devils. It depends on your action. Like, what
Mm.
action are you taking, brings you in. There's some very sweet, sweet demons. I mean, Lilith, and some other demons, including Satan himself, who really believe in feeding the poor. That's like a big thing that they do. So I think that I think there's a lot within the Zohar telling us to question the Zohar. And I think
Mm.
that that's also a really beautiful thing about Judaism in general, is the permission to argue and the permission to have these
It's
conversations.
almost a duty. We're supposed to wrestle with the information and never just take in something because your rabbi said it or another wise person said it. You take it in and discuss it, because everyone is a teacher and everyone is a student, and you're supposed to chew on it and share what you know, or your perspective, and we come together and have those discussions and everybody gets something from it, and maybe something different every single time, which is another thing about the Zohar, is that you can read one of the volumes 5 times and get a bunch of new stuff every single time. So, it's definitely something I would say that if anyone is interested, definitely take a look at some of the writings in there. And there's a lot of cryptic things there too that I know for myself, as I've grown as a person and had different experiences. Um, I have been able to understand them differently. Certain stories you understand from a different aspect.
Yeah, for sure. I also think having a rabbi is really helpful, like someone who really in our community is paid to just study spiritualism, because I don't know, like I have 2 kids, I have to make money, I have a job outside of just studying. I mean, and barely, but really my job is pretty damn mystic. I really do live in the magic, but not to that level. And so having a rabbi who I can ask a question to, who usually asks me a question back, and whether that's Rabbi Neil Blumoff or Rabbi Fulberg, Cassandra and I are in the same Jewish communities. So we are really blessed with some great rabbis here, right here in Austin. And they'll put you off and put you off and put you off about answering these mystic questions. And then when they start answering, you're like, ooh, I studied enough. And then they stop. And then they do it again, they answer again. And yeah,
Uh-huh.
I think it's like it's knowledge. And in that sense, that there is an occultism with embedded in Judaism, right? In that it's like we have Kabbalah Shabbat, which comes from the Kabbalah as we're growing up, but we study some mysticism. We certainly study Gematria, the numerology of Judaism and the words themselves. We study the Tetragrammaton. We look at, different candle rituals and things like that, right? But in one way, we're not offered this door until we start being questioning. And then it's like little secrets being passed on, and the secrets aren't necessarily written down, right? Like, for instance, well, in February, you do this thing with this tree, but what kind of tree and what thing? Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things, I'm going back to what you said previously about us being in the same community and whatnot. The thing I love about the community, especially you know my rabbi, they're so welcoming of people who want to learn and understand. You don't have to be Jewish in
Yeah.
order, yes, so in order to study Torah. So the weekly, obviously we're not meeting in person right now. I think that is supposed to shift soon with some of the Texas mandates. We'll see how that goes. um, but Zoom is always present, and you can log in and watch and have those weekly conversations, because that's really when we do Torah study, it's a conversation. It's not just somebody talking to you and telling you what is and what is not. So yeah, I love that. I love that it's open to people who have such different perspectives and varied ideas.
Yeah. Rabbi Neil is such a big interfaith rabbi that, I play klezmer music for a living. I play Jewish music, and um, I've done a lot of different church events with him and stuff with the band. And it is very lovely to hear the conversation happening when it is in a diverse way. And I totally welcome that and think it's awesome. But then there's something else that happens when I see him back at our synagogue. And I've heard him literally say to people from the church, this is my platform now. I'm not going there. Like, I am actually going to speak this truth. And so I think being able to know when you can and can't say things and how it's digestible is also another art of studying mysticism and an art of studying tarot. You know, there's sometimes in my tarot classes where, like, I don't say things to the earlier classes, like at the end, and I start saying things, I'm like, they would think I was nuts in the first class if I was, like, you know, saying some of the things. So I think it's neat to, like, recognize that there's different levels of that. And I know
Right.
that that's the case when I go to Mexico and I get invited to some Catholic rituals and not others. And I
Yeah.
think it's okay to just have some things that are just Jewish or just
Yes.
Catholic or just women or just, you know, people who identify as women or whatever. So it is interesting to allow otherism, like not otherism, but allow others to celebrate themselves and
Yeah.
let it really be, you know, studied on that level. I really encourage people, if you're interested in the Kabbalah, to, or the Zohar is mostly what you would find it as, to look up videos by a man named Daniel Matt, who is the only translator of the Zohar that's still alive. And he studied with the last translator of the Zohar who died in the 20s, or with from his teacher studied with him. So he's a direct lineage. And he's got a ton of amazing videos on YouTube that are free and super welcoming. Some of them are at yoga retreats. Some of them are going to be at a Jewish, like, Orthodox. And so you might be like, I don't even know what's going on. And just switch it. Just go to a different one. But his name's Daniel Matt. He is the translator of those big Zohars that we have that are easy to get today. And I really love his work a lot.
Now, I will say we did have a question. Marilyn Mix was wondering, Zohar Book of Splendors, if that's what we were talking about. And my understanding is that is a collection of some of the basic writings, but there's the Zohar volumes, some of the thicker books. There's a one called the Book of Splendors, which I think is just a collection of pieces from that.
Yeah.
Is
Hi,
that
Marilyn. Nice to, I'm not seeing any of the questions, so I'm glad that Cassandra is fielding them. But the Zohar means splendor. So all the Zohars are books of splendor. And I think that also
well, she's
Cassandra
saying
probably,
this one book. She said this one book. So I think that's what she's referring to is one that there's like, are you familiar with the one that's just like a collection of basic writings?
I studied the Zohar. I don't, you know, I don't go outside of it. I also am really picky with the books that I read. I always get them okayed by my rabbi. Marilyn, you're welcome to reach out to me. But the one that I recommend, I can't, Pearl Epstein. Pearl Epstein. She wrote a lot of books on the Kabbalah that are more like not reading the Zohar. And I forget what her other name is. She's got two, but you can always find her books at Half Price Books for those of you who are in Austin or a town where they have those. Epstein. She writes great stuff on the Kabbalah. It's been approved by the many rabbis. And it's a great way to study and kind of tap into knowing that you're reading. Now, as far as the Hermeticism, though, goes, we don't want to discount. I know Cassandra and I both have a ton of respect for the Golden Dawn and the occultists that came before. And I'm really honored that they wanted to incorporate Judaism into the tarot. And I just feel really blessed and thank you, right? So I'm
Mm-hmm.
reading this like giant Golden Dawn book now, the history of the Golden Dawn, and it's huge and it's got all these rituals and things in it. But as you read it, if you don't know what you're talking about, you might as well not even read it. I'm like, there is no way if I hadn't read what I've read and know what I know that I would know anything what's going on in this book. So it's kind of funny, like, to buy these books and look at them and be like, wow, maybe what do I need to study to learn this? And I feel like in some ways it's got that like rabbinical, like, here's this thing, but you can't understand it unless you go learn Spanish or whatever,
Uh-huh.
you
Yeah.
know? So
Yeah,
yeah,
like the
for
in comparison also the Eliphas Levi's Tree of Life book, which is, you know, same thing, similar, and it's beautiful and has a lot of excellent information in there, but you have to have a background to read it. So for sure.
And, you know, he was a Catholic priest. He was going to be a priest and fell in love and decided not to be celibate, and then changed his name to sound Jewish, and didn't really have any formal Jewish studies. And so that's always an interesting, like, thing to look at. Like, he must have met some Jewish mystics. And the thing that I picture in my, like, wild imagination is around the same years in Spain that we started seeing the tarot being painted, and we started seeing yogis coming through swallowing swords and playing music, and klezmers traveling from town to town. And, like, where do you think they all hung out? Like, together. Like, the after parties have always been us hanging out together and having these conversations. And they're no more magical and mystical than we are. They're not. They're just, it's from a different time. But, like, it's like us having these conversations now. And I love that the Golden Dawn has incorporated all of these, like, Hebrew letters and concepts around the numerology around Judaism, and yet somehow almost entirely left out our people, including our women in the tarot. But, you know, Pamela Coleman Smith herself was converting to Catholicism at the end of making the tarot deck. So
Yeah, you mentioned that. I had not been aware of that previously.
Yeah, which is interesting, especially since, anyway, I don't want to go totally into that part of it. But yeah, no, I just don't want to discount the Golden Dawn entirely. I think the thing is when we read these different books, to look at, like, whether or not it was kind of watered down. And I know Cassandra had mentioned to me about, you know, Madonna kind of popularizing the Kabbalah, and that being kind of a watered down version of it, you know. And for a while, like, for me, like, it was really frustrating to hear people, like, talking about the Kabbalah that were like, they didn't even know it had anything to do with the Torah. They thought it was a book. The Kabbalah is not a book. It's a tradition. It's what we receive from the Torah, from the Zohar, from our gods and goddesses, from our holy androgynes, from our inner divine high priestesses and teachers and hierophants and whatnot. So I think it's really cool that Cassandra, that you brought up this topic to have here and just open these discussions. And I think we should all look at, like, where are these things that we're learning? Where did we get them from? Where are they taken from? You know, where are these symbols? And certainly Hermes Trismegistus shows up lots of times in, you know, the tarot, and Ezekiel's chariot and the world, and the Wheel of Fortune shows up in those 4 fixed signs. Those are the creatures that he saw in his vision. And if you look at the Rider-Waite and you look around the wheel, you'll see 4 Hebrew letters that spell Yud He Vav He, which is I am, all that is and all that will be and all that ever was. And that happens when Moses meets God, and God won't define itself. And the whole concept of the tree of life being this beautiful, infinite, spiraling universe made up of multiverses, that is what we are created in the image of. Not some dude sitting on a throne, but rather our geometry within. And it's like looking at a plant and how we have veins and arteries, and plants have phloem and xylem, right? And we have hearts that beat, and the earth has the central pulse, and we have psychic streams. Just like under the ocean, there's these streams that carry, you know, fish through, you know, thousands of miles to other places. And we are microcosms of the macrocosm, which exists in another microcosm and a macrocosm, and it goes on and on and on and on. And we don't even know the largeness of it, right? The tree of life itself starts here in the physical plane. And if you look at the tree of life itself, Keter is on the top. That is the roots. That tree is hanging upside down. That fruit is coming down to earth. It's an upside down tree rooted in the divine. And so the first Sephirot, the Keter, is the ones of the tarot. So that is the ones, right? And as you go through the 10 Sephirot, they represent the 10 minor arcana. The pages are interactions between the worlds. There's 4 worlds in that tree of life as well: earth, fire, air, and water. of course, much like the alchemists' elements that came from the ancient Hermetics. And yet still, we have hundreds and hundreds of elements, right? But guess what? They all break down into four. They all break down into liquid, solid, gas, or plasma, which is earth, fire, air, water. And that represents those four worlds. So the pages are in between, and then the major arcana are the pathways between the Sephiroth. And I love to do a tarot reading myself. The main spread I use, if I read with spreads, is a tree of life. And looking at like, is air in the fire world? You know, the fire's on top of the tree of life. And so if you get a lot of wands up there, it's like, ooh, lots of fire up here in this like connection with spirit, you know. But what if you get a lot of water up there? It's like, are you putting your spirit out? So it gives you this whole other way. Or are you making tea with your spirit? Whatever. It gives you this whole other way to like dive into the tarot and dive into the inner universes that are within us, like even each little individual cell. I'm sorry, you guys, I'm an anatomy teacher also, so I geek out a little
No,
bit on this stuff.
I love it. I was going to tell you how beautifully you're expressing everything. So keep going, keep going.
But yeah, just each little individual cell within, you know, we have these little cells and they have little keyholes on them. And we have all these chemicals going through our body that specifically attach to these keyholes, and these keyholes open and things flood in. And that's what makes energy, right? Like glucose, which is our friend, right? It like we eat and glucose happens and our pancreas is like, oh my God, I'm going to release insulin. And insulin, you can picture like little skeleton keys running around the body, and it finds the perfect keyhole and opens the cell, and glucose comes running in, and the body makes energy. It makes ATP. And like, that's exactly like a whole nother level of another body. In there, there's the mitochondria, there's the, you know, all these different parts that are just like our organs, that are just like the outer part of us. We breathe air, you know. And so it's like, when you look at that tree of life, it's not just 10 flat, two-dimensional circles. They're infinite. And within each sephira, that all 10 exist. And within each 10 of those, another 10 exists, and another 10, and another 10. And it reminds me of, I don't remember what prophet, maybe Wendy will remember, but it might have been Elijah, but I don't remember who's walking with Elijah. And they're asked, like, do you know what's in the walnut? You know what's in the walnut? What is in the walnut? I mean, a tree, right? But where's the tree come from? A walnut? Well, where does the walnut come from? A tree? So the sephira, the tree of life, is the energy, the Ein Sof, which is the primordial energy that comes in through from whatever is outside of there into our tree of life. That energy that keeps that tree turning to a nut, to a tree, to a nut. It's that energy that reminds me of the Fool. The Fool tarot card traveling through the deck. That reminds me of our hormones, like traveling through our bloodstream to communicate, to try to help us like experience this beautiful life and kind of like, you know, be, so that we can be, you know. We want to experience life, and this concept of being able to create ourselves and come into creation in this sacred geometry that is the Sephira, that is the tree of life, that is the four worlds, is just us. That's it. There's no more magic other than us. Sometimes we're looking outside of ourselves for magic, like, will a rabbit appear out of the hat? Or can I make anything happen that I want? Or can I just be like blown away that I have a hand? Like literally, wow, look at right? And so the Sephira isn't just about like this magical, mystical message. It's also about like, how do I decide what kind of dessert I want? Right? So like, I could be hanging out with Cassandra and be like, I have a divine idea. I want something sweet. That's the first, that's the Kether, that's the divine inspiration. And then the second Sephira, which is called Chokmah, is going to be like, yeah, something dairy. And then Bina is like, oh my God, they don't, okay, fine, ice cream sounds good. And then Gavora, and then it goes to it goes down right to the next, to Chesed, who's like, "Ooh, ice cream! Let's get in the car and drive!" And it just starts driving and driving and driving and driving and driving, And then Gavora has to be like, oh my God, would you just turn left? Like, you've got to know where you're going, you know? And it's like, it has some control over that. That's the other side of the tree of life. And then it gets to the heart, to Tiferet, to the six. And the six says, well, how do I want to interact with the world I'm getting? Okay, I know I want ice cream, but wow, but I don't want to use, I know I have to go to a vegan ice cream store and it has to be someone local because that's how I want to interact with my community. And then it might get really too focused on like which one to go to. And that's in Netzach, which is the seventh. And then the eighth one, which is Hod, has to have a little bit like calm down. Like we can go to another one tomorrow. The closest one is fine. And then it gets to Yesod. How do I deal with the world? What do I do? How do I connect now with that ice cream to myself? And then you eat it. Because that is that divine message being realized physically. And that is the fruit. And that is it is that simple. Like that is the tree of life. And it's all happening at once. So we like to think of it as this pathway, which you can see on the top of the tower, key number 16 in the tarot. That pathway is the drawing from one Sephiro to the other. Not the pathways that you might be thinking of more in the lines that are in between the tree, but rather the way that the energy flows from one Sephira to another.
Looks like a lightning bolt and has been likened to the lightning bolt, yes.
Yes, we're trying not to show you things, so this can be a podcast.
So the, and understanding how we get from divine to manifest physical and having an idea and an awareness of that cosmology about, that is our very existence, we can then understand how the tarot cards interact and where we, which ones we pull, the interaction of them. Well, you have to work from here to get manifestation, so having an awareness of that's how the tarot and that tree of life aspect can be understood better, and how it can help us to have a different layer to look at tarot from. So
yes, I love to just lay out the tree of life, and then you can put all of the like wands from 1 to 10 on there, and then you can see like, oh, okay, this is fire in these 4 different worlds, right? This is Gavora, but it's like the fire of Gavora, where Gavora is water. So it's like being able to mix and combine and see where these different cards kind of interact with different elements and whether they're friendly or whether it's helpful or not. And yeah, just finding the balance between one or another. Like where do I have too much Netzach and not enough Hod, or too much Chesed and not enough Gavora? So Chesed and Gavora can be seen like the sea and the seashore, right? And Chesed being the sea, without Gavora, it creates a tsunami. We need Gavora, we need the seashore. So if I notice that I have too much sea and not enough shore, then I can work on building my shore. It's very similar to the way that I learned when studying Ayurveda at the Institute in Albuquerque, how the chakras work and how the chakras work together and how we look at the balance of those energy centers. It's kind of like the meridian points of, the Chinese system, the chakra points of the Ayurvedic system. And it's kind of like our healing system in a way, our Jewish healing system.
And there is an overlay of the, the Sephirot over the body, which is the, Adon Kadmon, which is the, how our body interacts with those into, and there's an interplay of that aspect. One thing I did want to go back to, though, before I forget, I didn't want to lose that, is that as you were talking about the different, the different points on the tree of life, we have, if you also mentioned much earlier about the high priestess and the high priestess card and how she sits in the center, and then you have the 2 columns. And so did you want to touch at all upon the 2 aspects of, the 2 columns within the tree of life and that centering space? Because it is about balance and finding that.
Yeah. So You can also see behind her, those pomegranates are in the configuration of the Sephirot. So the tree of life is right there with her. So those columns, those pillars are the pillars of the Temple of Solomon, and she sits at the sea, which also is nowhere near the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, but that's okay. But she sits at the sea of the collective consciousness of the community, not literally the ocean, which would be more in Tel Aviv. But the pillars themselves, there's one black and one white, and then the center, she's the center, right? She wears the crown of Isis, and then the pillars represent negation and affirmation, Boaz and Jachin, which is with the B and the J. And if you look at the tarot deck that's coming out called the Journey to the Tower, in which I am photographed as the high priestess, the Hebrew writing on the pillars is Rabbi Neil Blumoff's handwriting, and we were able to blow it up and get it on the photograph. So that's really special. Get that B and that J out of there. It's Hebrew. Like, let's use the letters, you know. But yeah, the concept of negation and affirmation as those left and right pillars, one being subconscious, one being conscious, and the center being the center pillar. I like to break it down again, like going out for ice cream, and make it simple, in that the conscious mind is the one that protects us. It's the decision-making brain. It's the one that says, like, I don't want to cross the street, there's cars, you know. And the subconscious is like, the subconscious, we like to like make this magical, mystical, the subconscious, but all it is like how we digest food and how our heart beats and our sex drive and our hormones and our, you know, it's really the subconscious actions happening in the body versus the conscious actions happening in the body. And so the subconscious mind has to interact with the conscious mind and decide if it's going to walk. Is it going to let the legs move? Is it going to communicate with the nervous system? Because the nervous system has to communicate with the endocrine system. Everything has to work together for something to move, right? So conscious mind is like, I don't like the cars. Subconscious mind is like, it's probably fine. Just, you know, I think we can walk. Intuitive mind is like, are they agreeing? What should we think? I don't know. Are we fearful? Should we not walk? Should we walk? And there's this center mind, the intuition, right? So you have that like conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and then that intuitive connection. But I think there's something deeper, and I think that's the cauldron of the high priestess. And as we find balance, we awaken this other third brain, which sometimes people call dat, but I think it's different. You'll
I
see
think
another Sephirah.
I feel like Crowley, that's what he referred to as the uppercase will.
Yeah, but in the Kabbalists, they refer to it as the female and male divine mind. So I've been trying to stay away from that in the topic of the tree of life, because but the black and the white, back to Boaz and Joaquin, it can be seen as day and night. It can be seen as the shadow and the light. And in Genesis, which is where Kabbalah comes from, so to not talk about the Bible is really not doing justice to this work. In Genesis, it says the bigger the shadow, the bigger the light. And I just love that. And I wrestle, as Cassandra said, wrestle with God is where the word Judaism and where Israel comes from. It's where our word comes from. It's what we're all about, wrestling with God. And if you listen to klezmer music, which is the music of the Ashkenazi Jews, it is all about dissonance. We are all about that. We love it, you know. But the wrestling of, for me, of dealing with some people's concept of shadow work being more in that Jungian way is like, shadow doesn't have to be what's bad inside of us. It could be the amazing things that are being covered up by too much conscious mind fear. Maybe we have this magical being inside of us that's the shadow. And so I love the concept of the negation and the affirmation not being bad and good. And I think when you remove heaven and hell, like we don't have so much in Judaism, we have alluring, you know, things to it. Satan is kind of more like the coyote in the native cultures. If you know about the tricksters that exist, Hermes himself is a trickster also. A little different than this like really scary devil and God that is presented in some of the Christian religions. When you take that kind of concept of bad and good out and you just look at like the positive and the negative pole, then you have the duality of opposites, and that is our foundation of physics. And that is how the axis of our planet spins. And then you just go back to the concept that it's just the world itself that's magical. It's just the way you can hold two magnets together and they pop together, or they repel each other. Yeah, that is those two poles that exist. And the high priestess, she bridges them. And so she allows us to see that duality. And Cassandra, I don't know if you are a big fan of Jodorowsky, but I am. And if you guys don't know who he is, he's a fabulous mystic and filmmaker. He made a movie called Holy Mountain. But anyway, there's a scene in it where the little boy is literally turned 7 and he's in Latin America. It's his autobiography. And he's dropped off by his dad at the sea to like become a man, but he's only 7. And he's so angry at his dad that he's throwing these rocks in the sea. And the Queen of Cups comes up to him and she says, because Jodorowsky is also the person who reconstructed the Marseille deck. If any of you read with the Marseille, I do. And he reconstructed it all back to its original form. So we knew which direction they were looking and what colors they were, which was so important to the Hermetic thought at that time. But anyway, so she says to the little boy, "You're going to kill the ocean. Stop throwing the rocks. You're going to kill the ocean." And he looks at her and he just throws the rock in, and the ocean completely recedes, and there's fish flopping around just dying, and he's just like horrified. And then the albatross come to eat the fish, and he says, "And now I don't know if I should rejoice in the feast of the albatross or grieve for the death of the fish." And I think it's that like bitter sweetness of life that is what turns us all on in some way. And it's just like that beautiful concept, right? So the high priestess is going to like grow tomatoes, and when she sees the tomato worms eating them, she's going to be like, "Ooh, the tomato worms are feasting. Well, there goes my tomatoes." The empress is going to be like, "Excuse me, get those things out of there and make my soil so I can have tomatoes," you know? So if you have too much high priestess and not enough empress, you might not have a very good garden. If you have too much empress and not enough high priestess, you might not have an ecosystem for the plants. And so, yeah, I think that it's all about, of course, I'm a Libra, so I'm like, it's all about balance.
Well, it is all about balance. I mean, that's what we struggle with on, in this physical manifestation, is trying to find that balance so that we can be clear and follow our path, and have that connection to the divine. We only have a couple of minutes left. So I would like to invite you to plug whatever you want to plug, any of your classes, tell people about your studio. I really thank you for being here, and everybody else who tuned in. Nicole Ricardo wanted to say hello, fellow Libra, to you. So
thank you, Nicole.
So
I guess the main thing I would like to bring up is I do have a court card class coming up, but anyway, I'm more interested in something that I was talking to Cassandra about, which is sort of a concept of, how they have these like elements of magic classes, or Minx and Muse, who's fabulous, has a baby witches class. And I was talking to Cassandra about doing a Jewish class and just getting all the Jews that are also witches together to discuss some of this on a little bit of a deeper Jewish level. So if you're interested in that, let one of the two of us know, and maybe you can twist our arms a little bit into doing a little series together. And I don't know what time it is, but maybe we have time for one question.
If anyone has a question, throw them at us. We do have a couple more minutes. I don't mind going over by a couple minutes, so we can properly answer any questions. But if not, just know that this has been a treat. It's been great to be able to discuss this topic with someone else who is also involved in the study, and to be able to share information. And there's already somebody wanting to sign up for a Jewish class, Jemica Rosenberg.
Awesome.
Thank you. Awesome. That would, I love it. I love it. I think it's definitely something that needs to be manifest. Like the ice cream journey.
Yes. We'll make sure and get enough Gavora to actually get it going and not just talk about it, right?
Absolutely.
I guess I will plug one thing. If you guys are really wanting to get out in the world on April 1st, I love the Full and April Fool's Day and the Harlequin. I'm going to be playing some pretty mystical, magical music, some tarot stories and things like that with my lovely husband, Mr. Blackthorn, on accordion at the Sagebrush. It is outdoors, super socially distant, $5 because we know we're all, dealing with monetary trouble, not abundance trouble, right? We all have abundance, hopefully. But yeah, that's going to be on April 1st. And thank you, Cassandra. It is such an honor to work with you. I look up to you, and and your work, and you've been such a mainstay of holding down the witch culture here for a long time. And
oh man, that's a high compliment. I could say the same of you.
And thank you everyone who showed up, and a gute Nacht, good night, Laila Tov, and reach out to us with any questions. I'm happy to send you my Tree of Life spread. I have a document. This goes for those of you if you end up hearing this on podcast as well. Just email me. I am at Ace of Cups Wellness in Austin, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you. And this will be posted very shortly. So thank you.